Okay. So since I'm not going to be here for the rest of the week, let me give you something to think about, which will frame the end of last week's parsha, all of this week's parsha, and next week's parsha to think about, and then you can try to explore it as you want. One of the favorite tools of modern literary students of Tanakh is the chiasm. What is the chiasm?
Parallel thing.
So it comes from the Greek letter chi, right, which looks like an X, right? It's cases where basically you have an A, B, B, A structure, right, where you have elements that are at the beginning, elements at the end, and then multiple elements, and then the point of it usually is that it highlights the center, or in this case, it highlights development. Right, that's my favorite chiasm. Sometimes, as one of my friends said, sometimes people love chiasms and they don't do anything with it. Right? It's like, oh look, there's a parallel structure. That's great. But the best types are the ones where it's not like A, B, B, A, but it's A, B, B prime, A prime. Right? Meaning you see development between them, and therefore by having these parallels, you see that a change has occurred. And that, like I said, from the end of last week's parsha through the beginning of next week's parsha, and possibly more than that even, you get this extensively. Just to sort of throw out some of the key elements so that you understand what I'm talking about, last week's parsha ends with
Yaakov leaving.
Yaakov leaving, right? Yaakov fleeing from his parents' house because Esav is chasing him. Now, next week's parsha opens with Yaakov coming back, and this time meeting Esav face to face. Now, right, even just plain geographically and like here, you don't have to be a genius enough to see chiasm. You don't have to be clued into this to understand that this is the closing of a unit. Right? He fled to find a wife in the house of his mother's family. He finds multiple wives, has multiple kids, and turns back. And the stated goal of him going, of him fleeing was
to run away from Esav.
Run away from Esav. And this parsha opens with him actually, next week's parsha rather, opens with him confronting Esav. Right? So you know that this is the closing of the unit. Now the truth is it's even more than that. Right? It really goes a little bit more, which is that right before he fled, why did he flee? Right, why did he flee? Right? Why did he have to flee?
He stole the brachot.
He stole the brachot. And what was the moment that his fate was sealed, that he would have to flee?
When Esav came back and Yitzchak.
Where Esav came back and flew into a rage.
Yeah.
Right, that's it. Where he said, and what was the line that Esav said?
Until my father died.
No, so before that even. Right, I mean, that's the end. But what was the line at which he first expresses his anger? Is this why you called him Yaakov? Right, Vayagveni zeh pa'amayim. Right, that he's cheated me out of this through deception. Right, this is his identity. Right, so there's a naming moment where Esav doesn't exactly name Yaakov. He explains his name. Right, he tags on an interpretation of Yaakov, and then what happens right before he meets Esav, next week's parsha? He fights with the man, and he's renamed Yisrael, Kisarita, Im, Elohim, Adam, Vatuchal. But the difference is in face-to-face combat. Right? You overpowered. It's not, he has a rename, but this time it's not a name which represents deception, it's a name which represents the ability to upfront beat somebody. Right? In fair hand-to-hand combat, so to speak. Right? And when he meets Esav next week, so you have the same thing, right? This time, instead of running away, he's running to Esav, and he's making up with Esav, right? There's a reconciliation, and the key to it comes out in, I mentioned this before, what does he say to Esav? He says to Esav, take my present, but instead of using the normal word, which should be mincha, my tribute, what does he say? Kach na et birchati. Right, take my bracha, right? There's a reconciliation. Take my bracha, right? It seems very clear that there's a certain parallel there. And Big Adol, if you look, you'll find that it happens over and over again. And my contention is always that this is one of those chiasms where you see development, right? Where in the one before, Yaakov is a very passive person, right? He can only sort of beat Esav surreptitiously. He runs away because he has Esav chasing him. He runs away at the instructions of his mother, right? He doesn't necessarily have, right, his own identity that he's doing, right? His mother is the one who tells him to run away. His mother instigates this whole thing. By the time you get to Vayishlach, you see Yaakov, who can, without deception, beat Esav. He initiates with Esav. He reconciles with Esav, right? He's fixing his passivity. He's fixing the extent to which he was deceptive. Who sends him back? This is the end of this week's parsha already. What? God, right? It's no longer Rivka is his own relationship with God. And if you keep working backwards, you have, and this week's parsha, you have a older brother, younger brother switch, right? Which is
right now, and you just look at the
Rachel and Leah, where Lavan, in a harsh moment, right, which has a lot of resonance, says, he says, "How dare you switch the older for the younger?" And what does he say? Lo yasa kain bimkomenu. We don't here put the younger before the older. You do, right? That's the implication, right? You do, right? So what you find is that in the second half of this chiasm, Yaakov is above board. Yaakov is dominant. Yaakov has his own relationship with God. Yaakov is reconciling. Yaakov is fixing problems. Right? In the former half of the chiasm, you have him running away, you have him being deceptive, you have him being tricked by Lavan. Right? So you clearly see this development, right? He's going through all these motions again, but he's more successful, he's more ethical, he has a more direct relationship with God, he is a more intense, right? He's more in control. Which leads you to believe that the purpose of this week's parsha, which is the center, which is that whole period in Lavan's house, right, is to develop Yaakov as a person so that he can become Yisrael. Right? Because if the chiasm starts in last week's parsha with him being ascribed a negative name, Yaakov, and it ends with Kisarita, right, you will no longer be called Yaakov, right? It's the end of that unit. Right? And in the middle, right, he's in Lavan's house. And even if you just go to this week's parsha, he starts off his relationship with Lavan by being tricked by Lavan, and he ends off his time in Lavan's house by tricking Lavan. Right? It's clear that he is going through the same motions, but emerging a better, stronger, more capable person. And the challenge of Vayetze is to figure out what is it about that experience that he went through. Right? Now, the answer may just be the experience, right? It may just be that he went through it, but then the second question is, okay, why was that important? Right? Meaning, if the experience in Lavan's house was what made him that stronger, better person, so then what was it why was that necessary? Right? If that's what the story of Vayetze is, and that's sort of what I'd give you, to think about as you go through the parsha. Part of it, I think, is, as I've already hinted at, is that shift from passivity to being active. Before he's the Ishtam Yoshev Oalim, right, which is great if you're a Kol guy, right, whatever, assuming you read it like Rashi, or whatever you want to read it as, right? It's not great if you need to forge a nation in turbulent times. You're going to end up having to go down to Mitzrayim, right? If you have to be the father of a nation when you're going to face difficulties, you need to be the type of person who can handle that, right? Who can control his own destiny, who can deal with problematic figures, who can know how to reconcile when mistakes have been made. Right? All the things are necessary, and Yaakov had to become that person. And I think that's the story of Vayetze, and that's the thing you see from this very elegant chiasm in this case. And again, not a chiasm of exact parallels. What's striking with the parsha is that Yaakov seems to relive everything in his life, but do it better every time on the second time around. Okay? So those are some thoughts. Keep it with you. Try to keep a parsha while I'm gone.